All right. So we've already had an introduction to profitability in the gaming industry. We've talked about the industry data in general, and we've talked about different business models involved in making games profitable and profiting off of these games. Now we're going to go into costs. Before we go into all the advice and all that stuff, we really do need to understand how much it costs at all levels to make a video game. We'll start with the obvious, most glaring, popular one, and that's AAA games. The cost of developing a AAA game can range anywhere between $60 million to $80 million just to integrate mid-level and basic features. We're not talking about the really fancy stuff there, just the basic and mid-level features. This can shoot up to $100 million or more if you decide to include really advanced level graphics like NVIDIA DLSS 3, or if you're trying to make games that really push the envelope, kind of like something like Immortals of Avium, where the large focus of it involves the graphics and the cinematic look and feel of it, or whatever technology you're pushing at that point. One of the first AAA IPs to really push technology to the brink, to the very bleeding edge, was Crysis back in the day. And when they got interviewed, they literally got asked, and they said, yes, we intentionally made this game so that to the point that most hardware cannot run it, because we wanted to show just how far we can take software in terms of hardware, right?
Speed too slow. Yes, we're gonna have to go right to ludicrous speed.
Ludicrous speed? Sir, we've never gone that fast before. I don't know if the ship can take it.
What's the matter, Colonel Sanders? Chicken?
Prepare ship! Prepare ship for ludicrous speed. Fasten all seatbelts. Secure all animals in the zoo.
Give me that, you petty excuse for an officer. Ludicrous speed! Go!
What the hell was that? Spaceball 1. They've gone to plaid.
So there's an example for you. We can go even further from those amounts. Just to give you an example, Cyberpunk 2077, another example, just to give you a big number for something very well known. They spent about $313 million in their game development just to release it. I'm pretty sure they spent much more past that, with all the changes they made since then and the DLC and what have you. But just to release Cyberpunk 2077 cost $313 million. And I encourage you to look the behind the scenes making of, which they'd made a video, various videos of the different aspects of developing their game behind the scenes, even interviews with Keanu Reeves as far as his involvement. The motorcycle company that he owns, where they got some of their most famous motorbikes for the game, like the one that Jackie owns in the game, and even the Porsche 911 that belongs to Johnny Silverhand, and how they replicated it in the game, and how they use an actual 911 in real life to record the sounds and get the look and feel of it, and so on and so forth. It goes into great detail, and it'll give you a really good perspective of just what goes into one of these massive games and why it costs so much.
Early on, we decided to record Johnny's original car, which is the Porsche 911 930 from 1977.
We recorded on dyno in control environment in a chamber. We could put mic in very different places. Porsche 930 that we recorded is the only car really that will be really sounding like the real car in the real world.
So there you have it. At the rock bottom, $60 million. At the very, very top, upwards of $300 million or even more, depending on how crazy they get, right? So AAA games cost a lot to make over a span of anywhere between 5 and 10 years, depending on, how the project is managed. At a smaller scale, we got indie games. These are also very popular. They tend to be far more creative and obviously cost a lot less. But how much is that, right? Well, making an indie game can cost somewhere between $10,000 to $1 million. Yeah, it still costs a lot to make an indie game. Most of small-scale indie games, they're developed by 1 or 2 developers. That's literally 1 or 2 people. They're low budget, obviously, and self-funded when compared to other games. They don't have a publishing house or investors to chuck up the cash to pay for development costs. A lot of these people really put everything they own on the line just to get this game out and make it popular, right? I'm an example of an indie developer who's self-funded. I pretty much have almost no money at all to pay people to work on this. So it's very hard to get development going. My game would cost more than $10,000, I'm pretty sure, at the end of the day, for the kind of professional work I need done on it. So we'll see. More on that later. On average, an indie game in reality would cost anywhere between $50,000 to $700,000 to make. That's from start to finish, like from development to from design to production to release. Right, $50,000 to $700,000 on average. It can go as low as $10,000, but that would be a very tiny game. A single developer can usually make titles that cost around $50,000 and take up to a year to finish. A single developer, as in a developer studio. And another interesting fact to add to all of this is that some of the more very popular indie games like Thomas Was Alone, Stardew Valley, and Undertale were developed by a single game developer. As in singular person, too. See, this is tricky. Single developer can mean the studio or it can mean one person making the game. I'll even add another one. Dust, An Elysian Tale, was made by one man, one person. Everything, down to the art, the animation, the programming, and everything. And it's probably one of the most successful indie games ever created, and it's been sold on multiple platforms, even though it started on Xbox way back in the day. It's a true success story, and one of the more amazing platforming action games I've ever played. I encourage you guys to go out and try it. But there's an example of an indie title developed by one developer, just to give you an idea. Look up their story. They were interviewed on the whole process, and you'll see how much it costs to make, and that'll give you a good idea if you got the talent and know how to do everything.
Oh no, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm so fucked here. I am so fucked.
So there you have it. AAA costs versus indie dev costs. Indie games averaging between $50,000 to $700,000 from start to finish. AAA game starts at roughly $60 million and can go up into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Massive scale difference, right? There's a lot to go into that as to why it costs so much. Does it have to cost so much? Yes and no. It really depends on a lot of factors, and that's something we can discuss another time if you'd like. So do let me know, and I will definitely dive into it. Now, those are just the general costs in terms of money. How does this break down into the production process itself, into the development process? Well, there's a few sections here that we'll go into. I'll talk about production. I'll talk about software and services, staff costs, research and development, quality assurance, and the time to develop. There's a time costs here that we cannot ignore, and so I will address that too. These are very quick. I won't dwell too much on them, but this is what it breaks down to in general terms. So for production, the cost of making a video game can range from absolutely nothing, and yes, that is possible with the right circumstances, to a colossal $174 million, just to give you a range. Indie developers, for them, it's usually costs can be relatively modest, and if you have a very generous and genuinely helpful people, it can be kept lower down to zero. This is volunteer work at that point. Something that I try to avoid because I believe in people getting paid, but it does happen. That it can go up to a few $1,000s often as well. They're just keeping it relatively low if they're done right and they know the right people and they have good friends, etc., etc. And it usually covers essential design and coding. Mid-tier games, they're more complex, obviously, in terms of gameplay and mechanics and graphics and what have you. And that bumps it up usually to a range of anywhere between $20,000 and $100,000. And this is production, like actively working on the game. Then comes software and services. If you're including that, a game that requires certain services and hardware, like for example, using a particular engine or SDK like Unity 3D Pro or Unreal Engine. Now we're talking about things that can incur a service cost of about $150 a month or $1,800 per year per seat per person working on the project, right? That's at that point, you're trying to, even if you're doing an indie game, you're trying to create a high quality game. I am actually making mine using Unity. So this is something that I have to calculate in, most likely, depending on how much I make. Because I'm an indie developer, this actually depends a lot on how well the game sells, which is how their cost breakdowns are calculated. So if I make over a certain amount of money, then from the game, then I have to pay Unity a certain amount based on sales, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are monthly services that I can go into as well. It gets really detailed depending on how you want to approach it. But for the sake of this video, presume somewhere around $150 a month or $1,800 a year per seat using that software solution. So there's an example. Using a game engine that is managed by another company incurs those costs unless you want to put in the work to creating your own engine, and that's a whole other conversation. Then we have staff costs. If you're not working by yourself, you got to pay people, right? So, okay, on average, how much does a game developer earn? Like the actual devs, the people programming and making the game. On average, they can make about $100,000 yearly. But top earners can reach up to $167,000, depending on the job and the position in the studio and whatever. Junior level designers who lack work history or experience, they basically do more basic work and things like that. They earn anywhere between $20 an hour to $50 an hour. So as a developer studio, I would have to be willing to pay each person an average of $20 to $50 an hour for their work. Mid-level developers, they do more advanced things. They have more experience. They know how to do more complicated things. They have more complicated job roles. Those range between $50 to $100 an hour per person, right? Advanced programmers, engineers, and stuff, the people developing the game engines, they are in that range. Then we have research and development costs. Now, there's expenses incurred from that. That can vary depending on the product, on the technicality involved, and what have you. Also, the processes and the hardware needed to carry it out. You may have to do some testing and some development process iterations and prototyping and things like that. There's a side benefit to this that maybe you may qualify for tax credits if you do this, but there's some very, very specific criteria for that. It's not that easy. But that kind of got moves away. We're talking about costs, not benefits here, right? Just to give you one concrete example of how much R&D can be incurred. Nintendo, in the fiscal year of 2020, 2021, they spent roughly about $880 million just in R&D.
Huh?
So that's another possible cost, right? I'm using a huge example here because Nintendo's a giant, right? But $880 million in research and development is no joke. That basically goes into whatever profits Nintendo's making across all its products, right? $880 million is no joke. And if a game makes only $60 million in profits, it got eaten up by R&D alone. just to give you an idea. So do keep this in mind. At the lower scale, at the indie scale, which is most of us is where we start, it's not that big. But if we do have to do R&D for whatever idea that we have, because we don't have anything concrete to go off of, that is a very real cost that you have to keep in mind. Then we have the variable QA, quality assurance. There's a generally accepted 10% rule. It's based on the budget value that you assign to QA. Personally, I take this with a barrel of salt, but let's go with it just for the sake of the video. It's called the 10% rule because for most mid-sized projects, approximately 10% of the development budget should be assigned to QA at minimum. And I'm adding that qualifier there here because a lot of people don't say this. At minimum, 10% of the budget should be dedicated to QA. Test efficiency is a measure of how much time and resources are spent on your QA or your QA testing methods compared to the results and benefits they produce. Just to give you an idea. That's the test efficiency. You want a high test efficiency. 10% rule is fine and all, but rather than focusing on the budget, which is something that a lot of people yell at me that, you have to focus on. When you're doing quality assurance, you have to focus on the quality. Yes, keep an eye on the budget. That's inevitable. That's part of the business. But if you want to do proper QA, the actual rule of thumb that we use in development is that you have to spend either the same amount or at least twice the amount of time and work that you spend on production in QA. Your quality assurance should be the same amount, if not double at least, of what you spend in production. That's in terms of time and effort. Because of how easy it is to lose track of or not notice imperfections and bugs in your code, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So on top of the 10% rule, minimum of 10% of your budget should go to QA. And in terms of time and work, you should spend at least the same amount of time, if not double the amount of time and work on QA that you do in production. Do keep that in mind. That is not just the monetary cost there, but the time and the effort cost as well. Speaking of which, we're going to time to develop. That's the final cost. The hardest to calculate too. To give you a rough idea, most modern PC or console games take from 3 to 5 years to complete, from design to finish, right, to release. Depending on their scale, they can be finished in 6 months or take more than 2 years to be complete and ready to publish at the bare minimum, right? But that depends on scale and features and what have you. But there's also that time cost that you have to keep in mind. How long is it going to take you to develop a particular idea? How long is it going to take you to prototype it, iterate on it, change it, modify it, improve on it, test it, quality assure it, get it ready? Okay, you have the prototype? Okay, let's get into production. How long is production going to take? What possible risks are you looking at? If something goes wrong, what's your turnaround time to fix the problem and move on? Or how long do you give yourself to just drop something that just is unfixable so that you can bring the project to completion? Do you have a deadline? Do you push it? So on, so on, and so forth. Time is your biggest enemy and is the most unpredictable, which is why I don't believe in deadlines. Again, a subject for another discussion. And there you have it. That is, in very general terms, the cost of developing a video game, whether indie or AAA. We went over AAA scale costs, indie scale costs, and a full breakdown of production and development costs per aspect of the development process. Take this into account. This is the last informative section of this very long video that I wish it was not as long. But with this, now you have all the information you need. You're fully informed. And now we can go into the meat of this video, the part that I've been wanting to get to this whole freaking time. And that is how to actually go about making your game profitable. I'm going to take all the knowledge I've laid out before you, put it together, and make something worthy of it.
So thank God that's over. I mean, it's over, right? There's not more, right?
Right. And that covers business models and what have you. Now we're getting into it. Finally, we're here. How to go about making your game profitable. This is what you've been all waiting for this whole time. It took a bit to get here. Now that you have that base, everything I talked about leading into this, now you have your knowledge about the industry, the money involved, the costs, the kind of profits that are going around, where those profits come from. Now I can guide you very quickly on what I believe and what I've learned are the best practices and the most common ways to make your game profitable in the gaming industry. And I want to start with something that's related to the game development, its production as a whole. And it's probably the most important and key aspect to keep in mind when trying to make profit of a video game. Control the scope of your game. What do I mean by that? The scope of the game, for those who are not familiar with what that refers to, is just how much is involved in the game in terms of content, in terms of features, the size of the game, the length of play from beginning to end, and what have you. Control that. Keep it manageable according to the amount of resources and people that you have available to make the game. If your scope is too big, you're not going to do well. Why? You're going to run into too many complications and risks when it comes to production. You're going to take exponentially longer to finish the game. You're going to increase the chances of excessive bugs and imperfections exponentially as well. If you want a very famous example of this, Cyberpunk 2077. Long story short, and I'll let you look up the story elsewhere. The reason Cyberpunk 2077 did so horribly in the beginning when it released is because they went at it with too large a scope for the game. And they admitted as much. The CEO, when he apologized, he said the key issue that led to everything else that went wrong with it is the scope was too big. And it got them into a spiral of cutting things, of shortchanging things, cutting corners and what have you, all because the scope was too big and they were getting delayed on releasing it. That's the short version of it. So controlling the scope of your game is very important. If you have plans for a game that has many features, expansions, mechanics, large maps, lots of sections, it's just basically a lot of content in it, consider dividing that production into chunks. Create a core experience that you then expand on over time with DLC or whatever. Whether it's free or paid, we'll get into that. Doesn't matter. Why do I say that? Because if you control the scope into a core experience, then that allows you more time and resources to making that as tight and well presented as possible. And then it gives you the freedom to really consider all the other additional bells and whistles that you wanted to add from the beginning, and dedicate the proper amount of time on those things as well to then integrate them properly. And you might discover that core experience changes your approach to all that extra stuff that you're going to put in. You will cut costs in terms of time, in terms of resources, in terms of people, in terms of imperfections and bugs to squash out later. Your game will be better presented. The reception will be better, so on and so forth. Control the scope of your project. I cannot emphasize this strongly enough. So that's the main thing to keep in mind. Coming up next, the next important thing is pick a business model. It makes sense. We ran through a group of key business models to keep in mind, whether it's free to play, maybe you're charging a premium, maybe it's a subscription model, DLC, Is it going to be paid or free? Are you going to do advertising? Does that make sense to you? Is it good or bad for what you're thinking about? This is where you think about it. And you don't have to marry yourself to just one. You can plan out multiple business models as maybe separate options to get access to your game. Or maybe your game combines one or two of these. Regardless of them, based on the information I gave you earlier about the different business models, make sure you pick one and you stick to it. And here's the very most important thing about this. Make sure whatever business model you pick fits your game design, fits the game that you're making and putting out there. If it's a bad match for the kind of game you're putting out there, it's not going to sell well. It's not going to have a good reception. People are going to review bomb it, and so on and so forth. For example, if you're doing a free-to-play game and you want to put in like paid content in there, like microtransactions in there, do not start locking away things that are part of the core gameplay behind microtransactions. You're going to get flayed. And I'm going to go into that later. A better example, Diablo 4. Here's an example of what not to do. Diablo 4 and Call of Duty right now, Modern Warfare 2 and 3. They charge you a premium, a pretty high one, standard AAA cost for a video game. And then the cosmetics they put in the game can cost half as much, if not as much or more, that you paid for the core game for just one tiny little cosmetic that has no effect on the game other than looking pretty. That is ridiculous.
私のこと好き？
なんてあざとい女なんだ。
じゃあ、可愛い？ね。
今会ったばかりだもんな。なあ、フィン。だが俺はすごくいいと思う、そういうの。
It doesn't make any sense to charge as much as a video game or even half of a video game for one tiny cosmetic that does nothing more in the game than make it look pretty. Just use your head, right? If you're going to charge 20 to 30 bucks for some additional content, make sure it's additional content, not fluff, like pretty fluff. It just makes no sense. Destiny is also guilty about this. A lot of the cosmetics in the Eververse can end up racking up a fortune. You end up paying 20 bucks for a set of cosmetics. It's ridiculously overpriced. Call of Duty is guilty of this too, and they've gotten flack for it, where you like a skin of a gun was costing as much, if not more, than the game. And you gotta balance this out. If you're charging $50 for a full game experience, a AAA game like Call of Duty or Diablo 4, it doesn't make sense that a tiny cosmetic costs the same or more than that, because you're getting considerably less. So don't do that to your customers, to your players. Do not insult their intelligence. That being said, keep in mind, monetization is not bad. It's okay to monetize your game. You need to make money off of it. You put your blood, sweat, and tears into it. Of course, you're going to want to make money of it. But don't sacrifice the game for it. That is the key. Be reasonable. The more reasonable you are and the more attractive your game is, the more players are going to come in. And even if you charge a lot less for your microtransactions or your cosmetics or whatever it is that you're going to be doing, the more players that come in, the more money that comes in. It adds up. Keep that in mind. Be sensible. Use common sense, as hard as that may be for a lot of people nowadays.
リリーもやだ！
おい、こら！
ごめんなさ
Don't sacrifice the game for just a money-making scheme. It never pans out well. Never, ever. Moving on. Once you pick that business model, plan your revenue model or that business model to fit the lifetime of the game and any future production. What do I mean by that? At its core, you basically want to make sure that people get a full product or experience for what they're paying for. So, you make your core experience, like going back to what I was saying earlier, you make that core game and make sure that the money reflects what your players are getting. Make sure that you're not charging additionally for that same core experience either. You don't want to double dip. It's just ridiculous. Like, okay, I paid for your game and now you're asking me to pay again to actually get something out of it? No. So not only that, but also think about how long it takes to complete the game, like 100%, going from beginning to end. Think about the average amount of time that the player is going to be able to dedicate to it. And do me the favor and don't do like a lot of studios do nowadays, where they calculate that based on the most hardcore and dedicated gamers out there. That is not realistic. You're cutting out a huge swath of people that are interested in playing your game, but when they realize how much time and they have to invest in it, they shy away. I am an old school, lifelong, hardcore gamer, and my real life circumstances are such that I really need to calculate how much time I can dedicate to any particular game because of, well, adulting. It's not fun, but I have to do it. I am a dad. I work for myself. I don't have anybody helping me here, so I have to do everything by myself. I have to manage my apartment, cleaning, cooking, and all that stuff. I don't have entire days to dedicate to excessively grindy games. So when you calculate this, try to think about the average gamer. By the average gamer, I mean casual gamers. If you're not tailoring your game to casual gamers, you're tailoring it to a hardcore crowd, that's fine. But do realize that if you do that, you're narrowing your scope of your audience. And you do have to keep that in mind in terms of how much money you're going to realistically make here. If you want to expand the audience that is interested in investing in you and your game, then you're going to have to think about the less hardcore player and what the amount of time someone can realistically dedicate to the game. That and how long it'll take them to go from beginning to end. Once you have established a rough idea of what that is, because all players are different, then you plan that revenue model based on that lifetime of a game. Okay, players are going to probably play these amount of hours before they complete everything. There's going to be a group of players that are going to continue playing it because they enjoy it and they like engaging in the game. They like the mechanics. And or maybe you designed it to be replayable, have replayability, which is always important. But there's going to be a group of players that say, oh, I unlocked everything, I'm done, there's nothing else to do. Think about that mark and plan that revenue model according to that, so that the player can get their bang for their buck. And then if you're going to expand on it, then you calculate based on that, and so on and so forth. So keep in mind the scope. Again, scope, very important. Keep in mind the lifetime of the game, and then pick your business model to fit accordingly. If you're going to keep expanding on it, a free-to-play or a subscription will make sense, or like the DLC or a combination of those. So just to give you a quick example. Next up, very, very important, pick an audience. And this does a piggyback on what I said previously about hardcore gamers and casual gamers. By picking an audience, what do I mean? Do I mean, hardcore players or casual players, average players? No, don't use that terminology. That's just general labels that people put on it to kind of refer to a particular audience. And that's fine. But when you're thinking about it in terms of your business model and how to make your game profitable, picking audience means three main things. First of all, know who you're targeting. And by who you're targeting, again, don't limit it to just average player, hardcore player. That when you think like that, you're excluding people. If you're doing this right, you're going to want to make a product that attracts people that are not necessarily gamers to begin with. It's something very important to consider. A lot of people think they're just targeting gamers. If you're just targeting gamers, you're limiting your audience, right? You don't want to do that. But you do want to target your people. Like I'm talking about age ranges. It's like, are you targeting everybody? Are you targeting teens and older? Are you targeting adults? Are you targeting a largely female audience? Are you trying to appeal to them? Are you trying to appeal to a largely male audience? Or are you trying to appeal to fans of a particular genre, or maybe fans of a particular culture, or a particular piece of literature or a movie, etc., etc., think about those things. Pick the key aspects that might attract certain audiences to your game and focus on that audience. And then slowly expand if you feel like it. But it's very important to pick an audience from the get-go before you even go into production, actually, because then you can start planning the next step, which is forming a community. You form a community around your game and your idea, and you'll immediately have a fan base, and you'll immediately have people interested are just going to jump on the game, even on early access. This is very important. All the most successful games I've ever seen out there have a community formed from the inception almost. They announce the game, they start bringing people in, engaging with that community, getting ideas from them, exchanging ideas with them, and they follow you. You basically develop this very loyal army that supports you all throughout. You have a community, your game's going to sell, period. Just take good care of that community. And to chime in on that, actively engage with that community. Just keep them engaged. Be transparent. Be as transparent as you can possibly afford. I don't mean reveal absolutely everything about your business and your private stuff. No. But be transparent, at least as far as the game and its development goes. If you're transparent with your community, they will stick around. And then the ones you don't, you're going to clearly see are people that weren't even interested in supporting you in the first place. So it'll help you weed out the fakes and the trolls from the actual people that are interested in your game. And based on that, you might find out other audiences that you can expand to and bring into that community. Your community will help you with that. These are the people you can ask. Hey, what do you think is missing? Do you think we can attract other kinds of people to this game? And so, what do you think would help with that? Do you think I should change this or no? And get their feedback. Don't knee-jerk react and go with whatever they tell you, but do get their feedback and consider it. Best example I can give you right now of the most recent is Arrowhead Studios, the ones that made Helldivers 2. Even through the crazy fiasco that we've seen recently with the whole PlayStation Network account linking issue, they have continued to engage with their community, and they were able to get past that, at least with their community. They're still dealing with the after effects, but it didn't sink them because they have a very engaged, very good community. They're very transparent with them. They're always honest with them, and they don't dismiss them. You have no idea how much of an anchor that is. Another studio that's been very good about that is Digital Extremes, the makers of Warframe. They've been around 11 years for good reason. That community is very tight, and the developers actively engage with them on a weekly basis and on a monthly basis, and they even have dev streams that they stream live about new changes, new things, new content they're bringing into the game, and they discuss with the community the reasoning, how it came about, what they're thinking about, and they get feedback, and they immediately listen to the players. And if something's not going to fly, they try it out for a bit, and if it doesn't fly, they take it out and they change it. Very important to engage with your community. It'll go miles, trust me. Next up is something that a lot of people don't think about, and you should be doing this from the moment you have your idea for your game. Research other games of a similar design and genre. I cannot emphasize how important this is. I cannot emphasize it enough. Studying other games of similar, within the same design style and type and genre of your game will give you a really good idea of the kind of reception they get, where they fail, where they succeed, why, what went about. If you see one that failed, look into it. Try to find news articles or whatever that explain what happened. Go into the forums, see what players were complaining about and how the developer responded. Because oftentimes it's not so much that the players didn't like something, it's the way in which the developer responded that sank the game. Learn from their mistakes, find out what doesn't work, and keep an eye out for it in your own design. The ones that do succeed, look into that as well. See what the players were feeding off of. What kind of players, remember, focus on your audience. What kind of players responded to it well? What kind of players didn't respond? Because even if it's a very successful game, maybe the audience that it was targeting is a very different audience from yours, and you need to look for people that reflect more the kind of audience you're targeting to see how they responded to that, right? And this is research and a lot of research and investigation you're gonna have to do on your end. This is very, very, very important. It will lead to fewer surprises when you release the game. And it'll assist you in engaging with your community. Whatever you find out doing that investigation, bring it back to your community and tell them, look, I've been looking around, I've seen this, I've seen that, what do you guys think? And get feedback from your community to confirm your findings. Always confirm your findings. Otherwise, it's just investigating and gathering data. Research involves confirming and testing. Remember that difference. The next step it would be to work on your and your game's visibility, aka marketing. Why do I say your and your game? You need visibility too. People need to get to know you as a developer, as the brains behind the vision, so to speak. The brains and the heart behind the vision. CEO Pilestead, the head of Arrowhead Studios, is the prime example of this right now. He's active on X the whole time, even in parts that he disagrees with it with the community in terms of the game's development and what have you. He's open about it. He's transparent about it, but he's also engaging the community and opening to listening and telling, look, this is what I think. This is where it came from. What do you think? And he has an active exchange with them. So the more visible you are, the more people get to know about you and your game, and the more attractive it is. It's natural marketing that doesn't cost anything. Your game's visibility as well. Put it out there. Put it on your social media. Whenever you have something you can show, and do be careful about this. Don't show too much. Every now and then you reach a milestone and say, hey guys, game's coming along great. Take a look at this. Don't go too deep into it. Don't reveal too much of the inner workings, but do show it off frequently. Let people know that it's in development. Things are happening. Things are evolving. It'll increase that interest and that engagement from your community, and maybe other people see it and say, this is coming along. This looks like a fun game. Your visibility is very important. If you're not visible, people are not going to know about you. They're not going to buy your game because they don't even know it exists, right? That being said, you should be working on this, on your marketing, on your visibility, as much as you're working on its development. Seriously, just as much. Push it. Do not neglect this. Again, if you're not visible, people are not going to know about you. They're not going to pay to buy your game. Don't hesitate to seek help for this. And consider this all caps level warning. It's a lot of specialized work. Marketing is not as simple as it sounds. The engagement part is free marketing that you can do. But actual marketing, like really targeting an audience and pushing out a product and marketing a product, that's a specialized skill. It involves a lot. I've learned a lot about marketing, and even now, with everything that I know, I'm looking for someone to market my game, to help me market my game. Look into crowdfunding like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, and find someone who's done successful campaigns in those to guide you and help you do it. Just opening your own Kickstarter and doing the Kickstarter on your own, you're gonna drown so fast and fail so hard, it's not even funny.
遅れてごめん。無理かも。本田さん、諦めちゃダメ。え、先生、何言い出してんの？無理じゃない。諦めたらダメだよ。いけるよ。まだいける。ブレックス。やめない。
Get help. Even if you cannot pay them up front, try to find someone who's willing to help you and work something out. Because if you're successful, you're going to be able to pay them. I guarantee you. Right? Next up, and now is when it starts getting really tricky and tactical. Pay attention to upcoming games and their release dates. You do not want to be overshadowed. And especially if you're an indie developer, and you try to release too close to or around the same time as a very popular AAA title comes out, your visibility is going to go from 100 to negative 1,000 so quick and so hard. People are they're gonna erase you from existence. Look at upcoming releases, indie and AAA. Watch out for AAA the most because they're the nuke that can sink your prospects for profiting. Do not release during a time where there's a bunch of games releasing either. When you see a big spurt of releases that are upcoming, try to pick a time and where there's a lull, where you can increase your visibility and get a chance to grab people's interest before that. Too close to after one of those bursts is not good either, because people are going to be tapped out for cash. You might get some visibility and some wish list checks in there, but it'll take a while before they can actually purchase your game, depending on your price point. But still, even a $5 game, $10 game, it's not going to be feasible for someone who just spent $100 on a special edition pre-order that they put in for this massive AAA game they've been waiting for 4 years. So do put that into your calculus. Be realistic. Avoid the release date overlap. That's the key word. And again, the timing on this is everything. It is very, very important to make sure that you do not get overshadowed. Along with that, temper your expectations in terms of the success of your game and the profits. Not everyone can pull off an Angry Birds, a Pal World, a Helldivers 2. Those are perfect storms. Perfect timing. Among Us is another one. Among Us is a good example. Among Us, when it came out, nobody knew about them. It was a $5 game, went under the radar. People didn't know about it for almost, I think it was 3 to 5 years or something like that. And then COVID happened and somebody stumbled upon it and it exploded. Now they've got toys and plushies and apparel all about Among Us and a VR version and what have you. Took them 3 to 5 years for people to notice them. So again, temper your expectations. Not everything is a home run hit. And it has to do a lot with the combination of all the things I mentioned up until now, the timing, the visibility, your marketing, your design, your community, all of that combined. And if you do it well, you will do well. Will you be the next Angry Birds? That depends a lot on your game and how well it's done and how well you manage everything up until that release. But don't expect your game to be a home run hit ever, no matter how many releases you've done in the past. Temper your expectations. The next one's probably the most important of all to keep all of this in mind. Take critics and their criticism with a huge barrel of salt. I'm going to go over 4 main points on this. Opinions are a dime a dozen. Never compromise your vision for your game. Avoid the temptation to make everybody happy. You're not a taco. You're not going to make everybody happy. Erase that from your mind. And remember who your target audience is. If you remember those 4 things, the critics don't matter. The critics, unfortunately, at least in my experience right now, all the critics that I see online, although there are a handful that are very professional and good about it, their opinions don't matter for shit. Pardon my French. But they don't. If you respect a particular critic because you follow them and you like their analysis of a game and all that stuff, that's fine. It's good to have that kind of a perspective on something to kind of temper your expectations for a game and what have you. There's a whole lot of reasons to listen to a critic. But at the end of the day, they're giving you their personal opinion on it. They can call it their professional opinion all they want. The professional opinion is probably a slightly different perspective from their usual one, their personal one for the game, based on some standards or industry practices or widely accepted truths or what have you. That has nothing to do with your perspective, or the perspective of the players that play your game, that actually play your game. The critic is just one person. One person. They do not represent not even a third of the whole world's worldview. The people that follow them and take them at their word, they're missing out. It's only the people that actually engage with your game and try it and experience it that can actually give you proper feedback on the quality of the game and how good it is. A critic is going to be a popular voice that does that in the hopes that they enjoy it and then they put in a good word for you. That's all they're good for. Anything beyond that, ignore it. For the most part, ignore it. If there's an observation that you can kind of sort of see and agree and makes logical sense and is at the very minimum at least a somewhat objective, keep it in mind. But again, opinions are a dime a dozen. Never compromise your vision for your game. As in, don't use one of these critics' judgments or ratings or whatever to completely change the vision of your game. You discuss that with your community, get their feedback on it. You'd be surprised how much they disagree with some of the critics out there. Avoid the temptation to make everybody happy. You're not a taco. Emphasizing on that, remember who your target audience is. Those are the ones you want to focus in on. Those are the ones you really want to listen to the most. Your target audience. Not your fanboys. Sometimes your fanboys are going to feed you bad advice based on what they want to get from you. That might not always fit with your vision. That might not always be what you're designing the game to be like. You have a target audience. You have a vision for your game. Those should not be compromised as much as you can avoid it. You do that, critics are easier to handle. And that is all the main takes. All the main guidelines of the best advice I can give you to make your game profitable. In this last section, I'm going to give you the don'ts. Also just as important. But please, keep these points in mind. Turn it into a mantra. And you should do fine. All right, I already gave you the do's of how to make your game profitable. Well, what about the don'ts, which are just as important? I'm going to run through these very quickly, or at least as quickly as I can manage, because this is already a 2-part video by now. But these are very important things to avoid. And for the rest that I don't mention here, just look at any fiasco release-wise or business-wise by any of the major AAA studios out there and take that as a massive don't. A lot of them are very obvious, and most people are right in saying that they're just being plain old stupid. And do keep in mind, a lot of that has to do with leadership that has no idea who their audience is, what video games are about, or what that experience is ideally supposed to be like, what's important to a gamer. They don't understand because they're not gamers. They don't play video games. They don't understand how things actually work. They're just interested in the quick and dirty numbers on how to make money. If you want to make money, you got to know your product. But that tangent aside, let's go into the don'ts. First one, and I've mentioned this many times before, avoid monetizing items that have game mechanics attached. As much as you can avoid it. Do not monetize on something that has game mechanics. By this, I mean things like microtransactions, making players pay extra for a gun or for an ability or things like that. Try to avoid monetizing on just that one thing. It's much better to do a DLC content package instead. Ideally, it's better to avoid altogether. Again, going back to what I said, make a core experience that has everything you need in it. Everything that's tied to that core game, that core experience, should be there, and you should not be charging your player extra just to complete that core experience. If you're going to add things or have something extra that they can pay for, make sure it's separate from that core game. It's something additional, which is why I'm saying if you're going to do that, if you're going to go that route, make it a DLC content package for later that adds to the game. Doesn't feel like the game is not complete without it. And that's the key. Do not make a game and then charge for things that give at the very least give the impression that the game was not complete. Wait, you gave us an incomplete game and now you're asking us to pay for the rest of it. I don't care how cheap the game is, it looks bad. Make a complete experience. And whatever else comes down the line is something you add to it. Make sure it's something that's added to it, not something that brings something in that people felt was missing. Right? Very hard to manage, but this is why I said in the beginning, Your scope for your project is very important, and this is one of the key reasons why. Plan your scope. Plan that whole experience as a contained package, and then add it to it. Do not, capital letters, do not pay gate game items that directly affect gameplay. This ties into the one I just said, but it's very important to avoid this. Anything that affects gameplay, anything that affects game mechanics, everything that affects a general progression, do not pay gate them. Make it so that the player can still engage with it and earn it within the experience, the core experience that you laid out. Do not lock it behind a paywall. It is exceedingly frustrating. Again, especially if you're doing a business model where you charge a premium, where you're paying up front for something, and then you go in, and if you want the whole experience, you got to pay a little extra more. It ties into what I just said about monetizing items and things that have game mechanics attached. It's like you pay gate the game, and then when you get into the game, if you really want to experience all of it, you have to pay again. It looks bad. It's a car salesman tactic. Do not do it. Do not do it. Cosmetics are okay. Cosmetics, fluff, things that help with bragging rights kind of thing, that's okay, because you do not take away from the game experience. It's not part of the core experience, right? There's something additional that people can get to as a thanks for supporting you and your game more. Maybe you'll create cosmetics for those people who buy a Founders Edition or that want to have a VIP edition, right? It's just like, hey, I really like this studio. I really like this game, and I'm gonna show it. I'm gonna show it off just how much I like this game. It's like a badge of honor almost. It's bragging rights. It's I'm one of the people in the in club for this game. That kind of thing. And it makes sure it looks damn good too. Don't give them some crappy cosmetic too. Make it worth their while. But again, keep in mind what I said before about making the prices reasonable. Do not charge half of the game or more for a cosmetic.
言い訳は逆効果だ。ここはシンプルに。すみませんでした。腰を低く申しません。
It's just, again, bad. Just bad. Do not do it. Another big don't. Do not rely on deadlines. This is a trap that is much more likely to fall into if you're a AAA game working for a publisher or a major company or anybody that has investors involved. If for some reason you have investors involved, before they get involved, tell them ahead of time, when I'm making my games, I decide when they're ready and when they're going to release. We're not going to work on deadlines. If you force a deadline and we rush a product, we're all going to lose money. Make that very clear from the beginning so that you don't run into the issue later, like all these stupid big studios start saying, oh, well, investors. Okay, investors, you made them a promise that maybe you shouldn't have made because you wanted some quick cash for your project. Fine, understandable. It's a business tactic. But then don't come crying when you push out an incomplete game, and then you piss off. Not only do you piss off the investors because the game didn't make what you promised them it would make, you're going to piss off your player base who are going to start hitting you with refunds and chargebacks. I refer to you again to Cyberpunk 2077. The people that invested in that company, the investors who were part of the reason that game got rushed out the door, sued for I think $1.5 billion or something, at least $1 billion. They sued, and rightfully so, because they were told one thing and it didn't pan out, and they weren't straight with them. And you can look this up later. For that very reason, do not rely on deadlines. Make sure you're putting out a complete product. If the product's not ready, it needs to be delayed. People are going to yell and complain, yes. But trust me, that is much better than releasing a broken game, incomplete game, buggy game that people are just going to hit refunds on and never trust you on again. Damage will be done. It'll be almost impossible to come back from that. Or at least it'll take years Look at Cyberpunk 2077 with CD Projekt Red. Look at Hello Games with No Man's Sky. They managed to come back, but it took them years to undo that damage. And still, whenever something comes along the line, now people watch a lot more attentively and they're much more reluctant to jump on board.
お、どこに忘れてた？
先ほどのホテルのベッドの上のタオルの下に。
そっか、危ねえ。
ホテルのベッドの？
シャレにならんで。ハルトラ君、そんなちっちゃな子に。
最低。
違う待って、誤解だ。
Keep that in mind. Don't expect the game to continue to make money past its lifetime. Remember earlier when I mentioned to have tempered expectations and to make sure that you don't expect the game to make money, like basically make sure that you have the game's lifetime in mind when you're working on your business model. And this is why. Once that game's lifetime is up, once there's it's past being worked on or maintained or expanded upon, don't expect to keep making money off of it. If your business model is one where you're continually going to be expanding on it, that's fine. But when you reach the point where you no longer have anything to add or it's not feasible to maintain anymore, don't expect to make money past that point. I will add one thing in there too, and this is reflecting something that's being discussed nowadays. Do your best to make sure that your audience, your clients, your players continue to have access to what they paid for past that point. And plan for that ahead of time, because this is something you have to plan for ahead of time, especially if it's an online game. You have to figure out a way to either bring it offline or make it so that your audience, your community can create their own servers to run it on, or whatever. That depends entirely on the project and how you want to control your IP or what have you. But when the lifetime's over, also plan for the sunset and try your best to ensure that the players get to keep what they paid for. There's too many examples right now and for the past few years of games that have been sunset. The developer has cut support for it, and they literally made them unplayable for players, regardless of whether it's an online game or not. It just doesn't look good. And not only will your game end, your studio will end too, because nobody's going to want to invest in you anymore if you're just going to be taking things away. Just a little advice there. And finally, and again, this sounds like the same thing in different words, but it is its own thing. Don't charge money for incomplete content. This goes into the not relying on deadlines aspect of things. Do not charge money for something that's not ready, not complete. Don't. But what about early access? That's a good question. Early access is different. Early access, contrary to what a lot of people believe and misunderstand, is a way for the developer to offer you access to the game before it's complete to help in its development. Key point in there at the end. It is to help in its development. If your game is not ready, do not charge for it. If a content that you're going to add into it is not ready, don't add it in and don't charge for it. It's as simple as that. The early access, people going understanding that the game is not ready and they're paying for what is there, and they're paying a lower premium than what it'll cost after release. So there is an understanding there. But past release, if something's not ready, do not put it out. If something's not ready or it's incomplete, do not charge for it. Period. It may sound logically obvious, but unfortunately, it's a mistake that a lot of people still make nowadays, both indie and AAA. It doesn't matter. People get greedy. People get careless. People don't think. Please don't be one of those. Think about it carefully. Don't charge for incomplete content. And with that, we finally reached the end of this very long 2-part YouTube video on how to make your games profitable.
Okay. Listen up, everybody. I have some news. It's over.
It is a lot more involved than I'm pretty sure many of you thought it was. It is a tricky dance. No, there is no one magic bullet. Regardless of what anybody tells you, experienced or not, it is not easy, and there is no 100% guaranteed formula here.
We are screwed.
Even giants have fallen due to simple mistakes of not approaching this properly, or with a tempered mind. So in spite of all those challenges and how gargantuan a task it may seem like, it is very much possible. If you're disciplined and patient, it will pay off, especially if you're playing the long game. So do keep that in mind if you decide to go into this. That is it for the video. I am the Sarukage. I'm always available to give this kind of advice whenever you need it. You can see me go live on twitch.tv, _Sarukage. You can find the links below. You can go into my Discord. You can reach out to my socials. It's all down there. Look me up. If you want to discuss further, if you want to suggest another video for me to make, please let me know. For now, hit the like button so that I know that you guys want to see more of this. Follow the channel, subscribe to it if you like. Look me up on my Ko-fi if you want to have even more access and more perks to the things that I offer and the advice I have. And with that, I say goodbye to you all until the next video. Like I always say, remember to always be kind and just have fun.